Victoria Bennett stared at the hospital bill in her hands, watching the numbers blur through her tears. $87,000. The amount seemed impossible, a mountain she could never climb no matter how hard she tried. Her mother, Grace, lay in the oncology ward at Riverside Medical Center, fighting stage 3 breast cancer, while Victoria fought an equally brutal battle against crushing debt. At 28 years old, Victoria had imagined her life differently. She taught art at Jefferson Middle School, a job she loved despite the modest salary. Her small apartment in Portland overflowed with paintings, half-finished canvases that represented dreams she could no longer afford to chase. Every spare moment went toward picking up extra tutoring sessions, selling artwork at weekend markets, and watching her savings account drain like water through broken fingers. The eviction notice had arrived that morning, 30 days to vacate. The landlord had been patient, more patient than most, but even compassion had limits. Victoria sat on her threadbare couch, surrounded by the ruins of her financial life, wondering which piece of her soul she would have to sell next. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, assuming another debt collector, but something made her answer. Ms. Bennett, this is Claire Hayes calling from Sterling Technologies. We would like to discuss a business opportunity with you. Would you be available to meet with Mr. Sterling tomorrow at 10? Victoria frowned. Sterling Technologies was one of the largest software companies in the Pacific Northwest. Nathan Sterling, its founder and CEO, was a legend in the tech world. She had seen his face on magazine covers, always serious, always distant. What could someone like him possibly want with a struggling art teacher? "I think you have the wrong person," Victoria said carefully. "No mistake, Ms. Bennett. Mr. Sterling specifically requested you. The meeting would be worth your time, I assure you." Curiosity, mixed with desperation, made her agree. The man made of ice. Sterling Technologies occupied a gleaming building in downtown Portland, all glass and steel reaching toward the cloudy Oregon sky. Victoria felt out of place the moment she stepped through the revolving doors. Her simple dress and worn coat stood in stark contrast to the sleek professionals hurrying past with expensive coffee and designer briefcases. Claire Hayes met her in the lobby. She was a woman in her 50s, efficient and kind, with warm brown eyes that seemed to actually see Victoria as a person rather than an appointment. They rode the elevator to the 23rd floor in comfortable silence, though Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs. The office they entered was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city and Mount Hood beyond. Modern furniture in grays and blues created an atmosphere of controlled elegance, and behind an enormous desk sat Nathan Sterling himself. The photographs had not captured him accurately. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to calculate everything they observed. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, and his posture radiated the kind of confidence that came from building an empire before turning 35. But what struck Victoria most was the absolute absence of warmth in his expression. He looked at her the way someone might examine a piece of equipment. "Ms. Bennett, please sit." His voice matched his appearance, controlled and emotionless. Victoria sat in the chair across from him, gripping her purse to keep her hands from shaking. Nathan studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I will be direct because I value efficiency. My company has reached a critical juncture. Several major investors and board members are concerned about my personal life, or rather the lack thereof. They believe a man in my position should demonstrate stability, which apparently requires a wife." Victoria blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. I need someone to fulfill the role of my wife for a period of 2 years. It would be a contractual arrangement. You would live in my home, attend necessary social functions, and present yourself as my spouse. In exchange, I will pay all of your mother's medical expenses, clear your current debts, and provide you with $500,000 immediately with an additional $2 million upon successful completion of the contract. The numbers hit Victoria like physical blows. $500,000, her mother's treatment, no more crushing debt. $2 million, financial security she had never imagined possible. "You want me to marry you?" she said slowly, needing to hear herself say the words to believe them. A marriage in legal terms only. The arrangement would be strictly professional. You would have complete freedom within the parameters outlined in the contract. After 2 years, we divorce quietly, and you walk away with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Victoria's mind raced. "But I'm nobody. I'm a middle school art teacher. There must be hundreds of women more suitable, more connected to your world." "That is precisely why you are suitable. You have no connection to the tech industry, no ulterior motives regarding my company. You are educated, articulate, and presentable. Most importantly, you are in a position where the offer is advantageous enough that you will honor the agreement." The clinical assessment should have offended her, but he was right. She was desperate. Still, the idea of marrying someone who looked at her like a business transaction felt wrong on every level. "I need time to think about this." "You have 24 hours. Nathan returned his attention to his computer screen, dismissing her. "Claire will provide you with the full contract. I suggest you read it carefully." That night, Victoria sat beside her mother's hospital bed. Grace was sleeping, her breathing shallow but steady. The chemotherapy had stolen her beautiful auburn hair and left her skin pale as paper, but she still smiled whenever Victoria entered the room. She still asked about Victoria's day, still worried more about her daughter than herself. Looking at her mother's face, Victoria knew what her answer would be. Love meant sacrifice. Sometimes it meant selling 2 years of your life to save the person who gave you life in the first place. The next morning, Victoria returned to Nathan Sterling's office and signed the contract.
The Sterling estate sat on 5 acres of perfectly manicured land outside Portland, hidden behind iron gates and tall hedges that promised privacy and isolation in equal measure. Victoria pressed her face against the car window as Claire drove her through the entrance, taking in the sprawling mansion that would be her home for the next 2 years. The house was beautiful in a cold, austerely perfect way, all stone and dark wood with enormous windows that somehow made the place feel more distant rather than inviting. "Mr. Sterling values his privacy and routine," Claire said gently as they pulled up to the main entrance. "He leaves for the office at 6 in the morning and returns around 8 in the evening. He works from his study on weekends. Your suite is in the East Wing. His private quarters are in the West Wing. The household staff includes a chef, 2 housekeepers, and a gardener. They are all very discreet." Victoria nodded, feeling like she was receiving instructions for living in a museum rather than a home. Her suite was larger than her entire apartment had been. A bedroom decorated in soft creams and pale blues connected to a sitting room with a fireplace, a walk-in closet already filled with expensive clothing in her exact size, and a bathroom with marble counters and a soaking tub. Everything was beautiful and impersonal, chosen by someone who understood aesthetics but not warmth. The wedding ceremony took place 3 days later in a courthouse, with only Claire and Nathan's lawyer present. Victoria wore a simple ivory dress she had chosen herself, refusing to let Nathan's money dictate everything. Nathan wore another perfect suit, this one charcoal gray, and spoke his vows with the same emotion someone might use to read terms and conditions. When the judge pronounced them married, his kiss was brief and cold, a requirement checked off a list. "Mrs. Sterling." Victoria Bennett had become Victoria Sterling through paperwork and empty promises, bound to a man who treated marriage like a merger.
Spring arrived at the Sterling estate with an explosion of color that seemed to mock the careful control Nathan maintained over every aspect of his life. Cherry blossoms painted the driveway in shades of pink and white. Tulips emerged in the garden beds, and the world insisted on renewal, whether he was ready for it or not. Victoria had been living in the mansion for 3 months, and the careful distance they had maintained was becoming harder to preserve with each passing day. She found him in his study late one evening, surrounded by papers and glowing computer screens. He had canceled dinner, sending a text that he was working on an important acquisition and could not be disturbed. But Victoria had learned to read between the lines of his carefully controlled messages. When Nathan buried himself in work, it usually meant he was avoiding something emotional. "You missed dinner again," she said from the doorway, holding a plate of food the chef had prepared. Nathan looked up and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "I apologize. This deal requires my attention." Victoria walked into the study and set the plate on his desk, moving aside papers carefully. "The deal will still be there after you eat. Your health will not be there if you keep pushing yourself like this." "I'm fine." "You are not fine. You slept 4 hours last night. I heard you pacing in the hallway at 3 in the morning. Nathan leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she could not quite read. "Why do you care, Victoria? This is a business arrangement. My well-being is not part of your contracted obligations." The question stung more than it should have. Over the past few months, their relationship had evolved beyond the cold transaction they had agreed to. She had thought he felt it too, the way their conversations lingered longer, the way his eyes followed her when she left a room, the way his hand would rest on her back when they attended social functions together, staying there a moment longer than necessary. "Maybe I care because I'm human," Victoria said quietly. "Maybe I care because watching someone slowly destroy themselves is painful, contract or no contract." Something flickered in Nathan's expression, a crack in his armor. "I am not destroying myself. I'm simply managing my responsibilities. By working 18-hour days, by having nightmares every other night, by pushing away anyone who tries to get close." Victoria's voice grew stronger. "I know you are afraid, Nathan. I know losing your family broke something inside you. But you are not honoring their memory by refusing to live. You're just existing, and there is a difference." Nathan stood abruptly, and for a moment Victoria thought he would ask her to leave. Instead, he walked to the window, staring out at the dark garden. "Do you know what the last thing Oliver said to me was?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "He said he was proud of me, proud of building the company, proud of my success. And then 5 minutes later, he was gone. I have spent 5 years trying to be worthy of those words, trying to build something that would justify his pride. But every success feels empty because he is not here to see it." Victoria moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "He would still be proud of you, but not because of the company or the money or any of this." She gestured at the expensive office around them. "He would be proud because you survived, because you got up every day and kept going even when it hurt. That is the real achievement, Nathan, not the empire you built, but the fact that you are still here." Nathan turned to look at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. "I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to let someone in when every instinct tells me that loving people means losing them." "You do not have to know how. You just have to be willing to try." The distance between them evaporated. Nathan reached out, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his controlled exterior. "What if I fail? What if I hurt you? What if you don't? What if this is the chance you've been too afraid to take?" He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the cold, perfunctory kiss at their courthouse wedding. This kiss was raw and desperate, full of 3 months of suppressed feeling and 5 years of locked-away emotion. Victoria's arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer, and for the first time since she had met him, she felt Nathan truly present, truly connected, truly alive. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. This was not supposed to happen. This was supposed to be simple. Nothing about love is simple, Victoria whispered. But maybe simple is overrated. The truth comes out. The next morning, Victoria woke in Nathan's bed, sunlight streaming through windows that faced east, catching in her hair and painting golden patterns across the sheets. Nathan was already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression of wonder mixed with fear. "I've been lying to you," he said quietly. Victoria's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "The contract, the marriage requirement from my grandfather. It was real, but not the way I presented it." Nathan sat up, running his hands through his already disheveled hair. "My grandfather didn't just require me to marry. He required me to marry someone I loved, someone who saw past the money and the success to the person underneath. He wanted me to feel again." "I don't understand. Then why the contract? Why the business arrangement?" "Because I was terrified," Nathan admitted. "I knew I needed to fulfill the will's requirements to keep control of the company, but I also knew I couldn't handle genuine emotion. So I found a loophole. I created a situation where marriage was transactional, where feelings were not supposed to develop. I thought I could have the legal requirement without the emotional risk." Victoria sat up, pulling the sheet around her. "So this whole thing was a lie?" "No, the money was real, your mother's treatment was real. Everything I promised you was real. The only lie was the reason behind it. My grandfather wanted me to find love again. I was trying to prove I could fulfill the letter of his will without fulfilling its spirit." Anger and hurt warred in Victoria's chest. "You manipulated me. You used my desperation to create a situation where you felt safe." "Yes, I did." Nathan did not try to defend himself. "I did, and I'm sorry. I convinced myself it was acceptable because you were getting something you needed. But the truth is, I was a coward. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I hurt you instead." Victoria climbed out of bed, gathering her clothes. "I need some time to think about this." "Victoria, wait!" Nathan's voice stopped her at the door. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I manipulated the situation. But what happened last night, what has been happening between us these past few months, that was not manipulation. That was real. I didn't plan to fall in love with you. I fought against it every day. But somewhere between your kindness and your strength and your refusal to let me hide in my own darkness, I fell anyway." She turned to look at him, this complicated man who had been broken by loss and was only now learning how to heal. "Love is not supposed to start with lies, Nathan." "No, it is not. But maybe love is also about learning to trust again despite past betrayals. Maybe it's about choosing vulnerability even when every scar tells you to run." He stood, moving towards her slowly, "Giving you space to think. How do I know you mean it? How do I know this isn't just another way to get what you need?" "You don't. That's what trust is, a leap of faith. But I can tell you this, the contract has a clause that says if either of us wants to end the arrangement early, we can. You would still receive the full payment, your mother's treatment would still be covered. You could walk away right now with everything I promised you, and I would have no legal recourse." "You're saying I can leave?" "I'm saying you have always been free to leave. The cage I built was for myself, not for you." Nathan's voice cracked slightly. "But I am asking you to stay, not for a contract or money or appearances. I'm asking you to stay because I love you, because you showed me that living and surviving are different things. Because when I'm with you, I remember how to feel something other than guilt and fear." "I love you, Victoria Sterling. I love your strength and your compassion and your refusal to let me hide in my own darkness. I love that you challenge me and see me and make me want to be better." "I love you too," Victoria whispered, against his chest, "even though you're difficult and stubborn and emotionally constipated." He felt him laugh, a real laugh that shook his whole body, and the sound was like music. The road ahead would not be easy. Nathan had years of trauma to work through, and Victoria had her own scars from watching her mother nearly die. But they had something more powerful than fear now.
They had each other, and they had the choice to build something real from the ashes of a convenient lie. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the conservatory surrounded by blooming orchids and the green evidence of life persisting after damage. Her mother, now cancer-free and radiant with health, sat nearby chatting with Claire about wedding plans. Real wedding plans, not a courthouse ceremony with strangers as witnesses. Nathan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Ready for this? Ready to marry you again, this time for love instead of contracts?" "Yes." Victoria turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had learned to feel again, who chose vulnerability over safety, who loved her with the kind of fierce dedication that comes from knowing how precious and fragile life can be. "I've been ready since the moment you stopped hiding," she said. And in the spring sunlight, surrounded by Oliver's plants and the promise of new beginnings, they kissed, not because a contract required it, but because love, real and complicated and beautiful,